I feel like animation is not just like I just showed you, like moving typography. It can be the use of video. It can be the use of collage or illustration. It can be an illustration where little things within that illustration move to like tell the story. My name is Ashia. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to give this presentation on branding and kinetic typography. These are some of my passions. I have passions in film and animation. I love journalism and history. A little quick thing, like I collect articles and newspapers, etc. I do work with like some initiative-led stuff and nonprofits. A passionate collector of things. I love photography and videos and books and all those types of things. All right, so this is like a project I was doing that was in progress. But it's kind of like relatable to what I just mentioned about, you know, one thing I always think about is how animation can relate to print work or print design. So can I create an animation that I can translate into a poster or, I don't know, a publication or something like that? So yeah, I really, like this, you know, I remember at the beginning telling you I really love like photography and I collect videos. So this was like a video I collected. I think this was during like between Women's History and Black History Month. I believe they're sort of the same time, I'm not sure, but I ran across this video of Kathleen Cleaver, who is like a civil rights activist. And I'm like, oh, it would be great to create a animation or something. The reason why I'm here is to talk about typography and kinetic typography and some examples and some kinetic type techniques that you could probably integrate within like branding case studies or logo animation and things like that. So part one is going to be some kinetic type examples. This is what is called like a video ident. So say for example, I don't know, ABC, like ABC News or ABC Network. So ABC has like a particular brand identity that they showcase through animation. So this example is showcasing this brand's visual identity through kinetic typography. So it kind of looks like very complicated, but when you break it apart, they're using what I mentioned before, match cuts or hard cuts and grid systems, and they're playing with the tracking to create these animations. So I'm gonna play this for you. I think it's about 2 minutes. While I'm playing this, I'm gonna get my journal. Oh, is the sound on? Okay, cool. Yeah, so you can see here like a lot of this kinetic typography is one animation and it's put in a grid and it's repeated over and over again. So it kind of makes it feel bigger than what it is. Then a lot of this stuff is, you know, playing with the tracking, I believe is an example. Let's see. Here's a good example. So they're just playing with the tracking. And it's basically, you could think of them pre-comping an animation and repeating it over and over again. But, you know, they just add, seems like to me, they just add like a lot of like simple, you know, like easy easing and playing with like the value graph. But like these type of animations, I feel like it just feels like really satisfying because of how the typography is structured. Simplicity sometimes is like the best way to go. So if you have a animated element, I don't know, like one letter form that you're trying to animate and you're animating the position, you can animate that position and just pre-comp it a bunch of times, and all of the letter forms are animated at the same position. So you can do that. You can play with the timing so they may not come in on the same time. This Glassdoor rebrand is by design agency named Koto. The reason I really love it is because they use animation to tell the story. They use kinetic animation to reveal the logo. And we'll see later in the case study, they use it to like show the brand identity. It's like they're using the little quote marks to reveal Glassdoor. And that is like a very sort of like small but effective at the same time. Like they're not doing like, ooh, this big dramatic animation. The animation that they're doing is working and it's essential to the whole brand. For this animation, it's just playing with how the typography appears. Then they have 2 additional animations that shows this is the vision. Then it pops up and this is the mission. And that's just like a very sort of, like I said, it's not like trying to do any, big thing. It's presenting the typography or the brand idea in a simple but beautiful way. So I love Koto because they do these like, it's a different brand that they did where it was similar, where they do these like animations of like character animations along with the kinetic typography. But I just feel like this is another example of, say for example, this purple rectangle. This purple section is just somebody's hand, shaking up and down. It's not like in your face. It's not, you can choose to really push the animation and make it like really, in your face, but it doesn't have to be like that. But you also want to think about, say if this was static, I feel like it wouldn't have the same impact. Like these little sort of small gestural animations add to the brand. Let's see. So here it is again. They're using like that same identity that we just saw before, where they have sort of like these pop-up cards where, it doesn't look out of place because they're repeating it again. Even the way they show color, like this is not, animated typography, but it's just showing in a really great way. These are the colors I use. Instead of just it being like static, it adds more, expression. I love this one. So showing like the typeface that they chose through animation. So I feel like this is a really great way instead of, sometimes when we show like the typeface, it's just static. It's like, this is what I chose. But I feel like they show the grid, they show, okay, all the weights of the typeface. They show it could be in multiple weights through just animating. And, usually if it's static, it's gonna take up a lot of space. Basically, I created this like kinetic typography challenge. I picked a random typeface and I used this generator, random theme generator. And from that generator, my word that I chose was royalty. So And that's my word. My theme is royalty. So then I challenged myself, select 4 to 6 words from my theme and create 2 to 4 scenes of kinetic typography. And I'll give you this presentation and maybe you could possibly do it yourself. When we think about kinetic typography, all the examples that I showed you had like a grid. The grid is basically using existing animation that you may have created, or you animated position of one pre-comp and then adding like maybe an effect or some type of movement to make it feel like it's larger than what it actually is. So the techniques that I used in this were like tracking, position, scale, pre-comping. One effect that I used from one was the CC reptile effect. And this is not really, I wouldn't say, some of these are effects, some of these are more techniques. So time reverse layer is like I guess more of a technique. But I'm going to show you how to do that. So let me go into After Effects. For my first example, I want to show you sort of probably like the simplest version. I would say this is probably the easiest out of all of the scenes that I showed you. So for this one, I'm just going to go into my pre-comp. So how I created that is that you can choose the size of your pre-comp. So think of a pre-comp as like a artboard in Illustrator. So in my composition settings, I made my pre-comp 1920 by 630. Depending on what your typeface is, it may be larger, it may be smaller. But the whole idea behind me creating a pre-comp this big was so that my typography could fit within the board I created. And that when I animated the position, say for example, like when I play this, you see like how the animation cuts off. So I wanted that. So when I created a grid, all of the letter forms that I animated looks like they're all like doing the same thing and they're moving at the same pace. All of these letter forms are on separate layers. I always copy like, one full, typed out version, but all of these letter forms are on separate layers. So say if let me turn my brightness up. Say if I took away some letter forms. So the K, I'm just animating a position. Then I just put like easy ease on it, which I didn't do anything to the value graph. Like the value graph is the same. It has like the same arch. If I wanted to change it and make it, I don't know, sort of, lift off. The thing about the value graph is that it's sort of like, you kind of have to feel for it. Like it's not, you don't have to understand all these numbers or all that type of stuff. It's basically on feeling. If I wanted to go, like this, where when it moves up, it animates really quickly, I could do that. If I wanted it to become slower as I animated it, I could do that. So it's all based on feel. It's not based off of any numbers, it looks complicated, but it's not. It's just based off of feel. So I have my K going up. So then I'm like, I want my I to go down. So now they're like crossing paths. I wanted my N to go up. So I just animated it up. I wanted my G to go down. All right, so now I have like a initial animation that I can use to create like a bigger grid system. So what I did for this is just selected all of them. Okay, so this means that all of my files are stored into one thing. So because it's stored into one thing, I can translate that to another composition. So if I wanted to create a new composition, I could just, if I wanted to, I can just copy and paste this here. Now I have my animation here, right? Say for example, if I want to duplicate this, right? Like this. Now you have two animations at the same time. So that's like a more of a sort of simpler example of how you can create one animation and you can repeat it a multitude of times. And I'm gonna show you like the effect that I use to create like a expansive grid. One effect that you can use is CC reptiles. Put it on my first animation. Is going to say 0 everything. So where it says expand down, that's the width of your composition. So my width of this composition is 1080. Height.
I'm just trying to understand.
No, you're good. Okay, then you're going to expand it to the right. So you see what I mean? It's all about, feel. So now I have this. Okay, so now I have this animation. But for me, I'm like, I want it to loop. So what I did was reverse the whole layer to create more so of a loop. So you see it's like coming in and going back out, coming in and going back out. Yeah. So let me lock this so we won't see it. All right, so I have this layer. I'm gonna color it orange, okay?
This is great organization.
Thanks. Yes, a must-have when animating.
That's why I get real confused because I don't do that.
So, yeah, so I have this. This is my initial animation before I add any reverse time or anything. So what I did was just duplicate it. So I just Command C, then Command V, or you can go edit, copy, and paste. Right, so I'm gonna color this a different one. Let's do dark green. I'm gonna rename this reverse. So I know what it is, okay? So I'm going to right-click this. First, I'm gonna explain on this. I'm gonna right-click it, and I'm gonna go to time reverse layer. Okay, so here's the crazy thing is that when you time reverse layer, what you have at the beginning is all the way at the end. So when I play this animation, it's just gonna look black. I don't have anything, so where's my animation? So it's usually at the very end of the time frame. You see this? So what I did was, I'm just gonna find where my animation starts. I'm gonna click on it, and I'm just gonna cut it here. So you see it's like in reverse, right? So now I want what I refer to as a match cut. So I wanna cut two different animations side by side. So basically, I'm just gonna get this animation and put it next to the first initial animation. When I play it, it's gonna come in and out like that. All right. Yeah, so it's not really like as complicated as you probably would think about it. It's just one initial animation, and I animated it. I made a pre-comp and made a grid out of it using CC Reptile. Or you can just do it by hand. You could duplicate all these animations and just make a grid. So this is not using a CC Reptile. So this is what I mean by having an initial animation and duplicating it over and over and over again.
Which one are you talking about?
The first one,
Scene
one. And playing with like the timing. So you see like the animation, they all don't shift at once. It's sort of like a ripple effect. So you see I have all these layers. I have 8 layers of this animation. I'm just gonna play it. And this animation, you feel like anticipation because it's sort of pushing in and you kind of expect it to come out. And that has all to do with sort of the value graph and how you change the curve for it to present in that way. So I'm gonna click on one of these. So one of the pre-comps that I made. So for this one, here's my composition size. I feel like I had to do a little bit of math in order to figure it out, but you don't really have to do that. Like, you can just like change the height until you get it right. Yeah, so basically I took this is the same sort of length as 1920, right? On this 1920 by 1080 composition. So this is like the same length. So basically what this is just, I just typed Regal over and over and over and over again, and I just animated it moving from left to right. That's it. And let's look at the graph editor. So here's like what I'm doing within that. So I don't want to say, oh, this feels very complicated. It's all feel, because maybe you don't want your animation to feel like my animation, right? So if we look at it, the curve of my graph to the point, the starting point of my graph to this curve gives me anticipation. So you can think about rolling a ball. Say if you roll a ball, imagine these are hills and you roll a ball. So when you roll the ball up a hill, it's like friction. So I'm rolling my ball and it reaches its peaking point. And because it reaches its peaking point, it sort of crashes down again. So it crashes down. So you have like this acceleration and, pullback effect that you're getting with the typography. But this is just repeated over and over and over again. You see it's the same graph over and over again. So I did the same thing where I pre-composed something. This is the first one, right? There's one. Then you just add all these different layers. So how did I make it not come in at the same time? So I feel like if you wanted to, you can have this all come in at the same time. But one thing that you may not see at the beginning of my timeline is that these come in at different times because I cut each individual animation. You see like that little gap there, right? I like cut it to be that way. where this is like no effect. It's just cutting the animation at different times and putting them at the same starting point. So if they're at the same starting point, that means that you have a ripple effect within like the animation you want to create. They all like shifts.
Could you maybe
Yeah.
select all your layers and drag them all back a little bit so we can see the
Yeah,
differences
yeah.
in sizes of that little blink area? Yeah, there we go. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, so my first one, you see like as the layers get higher, the trim is shorter. My starting trim is much longer than my end trim. So Regal 8 and 7, like if you see it, it's like just a little bit. Then for 8, it's nothing. It's just the initial animation. So it's kind of like a ladder where you're like, you know, going down. But the timing is like depending on you. It's not depending on, you know, any effects or anything. I feel like this is probably, I wouldn't say this is complicated in my mind, but
Right.
it presents itself as being more complicated than what it actually is.
Okay, let's hear it.
So I'm gonna let my computer catch up. All right, so with this animation, there's no effects. It's just tracking, playing with tracking, the position, and the scale of the animation. All right, so let's get into like all the files I had to create in order to make this. All right, so starting with the initial animation. So my composition is square, so it's 1080 by 1080. And all I am doing here is animating the tracking. So how do we do that? So say, for example, you go to animate this little button. Like if you have like a text layer, it will always have this. And you want to click tracking, right? So you can affect the letter spacing in between your whatever type that you chose. Here's my tracking. So one important thing that if you want your tracking to be in the middle, you need to click center text. If you want it to be on the left side, if I click left, you see it's going to animate from the left. So you need to make sure it's in the center, which is kind of weird because you would think that you could do this within like the character settings. But yeah, so anyway.
Thanks for bringing that up.
So
No clue.
yeah, so what I did is, you see my tracking is at 0, my first initial animation or keyframe, and it expands. My tracking is now at 14. Then I wanted to go back to 0. That's it. So all of my letter forms are doing this at the same time. So they're all starting at 0 and they're ending at 0 with the same amount of tracking. So my tracking is 14. All my animations the same. What I did for this, I just duplicated them over and over and over. This composition is 1080 by 3000. So it's very long. So remember, like the height is going to be like very tall. So I was thinking I want to create a very long animation. You could use this just like it is for something, but that's not the goal that I wanted. So all of them is the same pre-comp. All of them are animating at the same time. So I'm like, I want to add some more stuff. So I added a date, today's date. And it's the same thing. I'm playing with tracking, but this time, remember I mentioned that if you want your tracking aligned to the left, you need to have your paragraph to the left, right? So this is just animating. I didn't really do anything. I just added easy ease. I didn't play with like the value graph or anything. So this is just straight out, no touching anything. Great. So now I just duplicated this. I put it within the gaps of the spaces between each animation. So now it's like all this animation happening at one time. So I'm like, this is what I want, okay? So now what I did was I put it in a different pre-comp. So this is our example of having a lot of pre-comps. I created initial animation, I created a grid, now I'm in a pre-comp. That animation is in a bigger pre-comp. I'm just animating it going down. So it's looking like it's doing more than what it is. It's not. I'm just animating it going down. I'm adding more movement to the animation. So what I'm doing is I say, I want to affect the scale. If I delete this, you're not going to see any scale, right? It's just going down, right? The position, it looks like it's more than what it is, and I'm just animating the position down. Now, when I add the scale, it looks like going to sort of a match cut. It's not like a match cut exactly because my scene is not different, but I'm zooming in I'm basically getting this animation and pulling it in. So it feels like more dynamic. For the motion blur for this animation, so sometimes like when you're working at After Effects, it'll just look like this and you don't know where your stuff went. But it's this thing at the bottom called toggle switches and modes. So if I click on that, I have access to all of this information. I have access to motion blur, I have access to some 3D stuff. This little thing, which means if I'm importing something from Illustrator, it just means that it's going to look crisp and clear. But for this, it's just a little motion blur button that you just click on. Now you have motion blur. And yeah, so that is like the BTS, behind the scenes. I want to show you like the mashup. So what is that? So it's basically creating a final scene with all the animations that you created. So what I showed you before is all of these thoughts that I had about how this typography can move across the screen. So how can I get that and how can I cut it to make a bigger animation? Sometimes I've seen people who design typefaces and they present their typefaces in this particular way where I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to show you like this little like character, then I'm going to zoom back out and show you like the big picture. So yeah, so that's the mashup. Here's my recap. So I feel like these are like some things to consider when you're designing branding or thinking about animation. So when designing branding, think about how you can incorporate these kinetic type techniques to like accelerate your brand identity. So what is like your overall purpose behind the animation? Is it to reveal a logo, or is it logo exploration, or is it for showing like your research or typeface selection that you chose for your brand? Does your animation serve a purpose? I feel like that's very important because you don't want animation to feel out of place of the story that you're trying to tell. And does it express the vision of the brand? Like you can do like a lot of cool stuff and a lot of different effects and After Effects, but then when you put it into your brand, it may feel like a sore thumb, like, oh, this doesn't really fit. So always remember that your animation doesn't have to be like big and monumental. The So purpose of animation is to tell the story behind your brand and the choices that you created. Yeah, and that's it.
Thorough.